Welcome to a talk about impact startups in Denmark with Anne-Katrine Heie Larsen, CEO at DC, and Peter Kofler, Chairman and Entrepreneur at Danish Entrepreneurship Association. Welcome to the both of you. My name is Muniza Rosendahl, and I will be moderating this debate. The talk is a part of the Green Impact Week, where there's been a lot of debate and focus on green startups and business. So let's just jump right into it, and let me start by asking the two of you, what is the main focus and purpose of your organizations? Anne-Katrine.
Yeah, I'm from DC, Danish Institute for Sustainable Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and for the past almost 12 years we have been running an impact hub here in Copenhagen for social, cultural and green small NGOs and entrepreneurs. So our main focus is to make the best framework, the best network around early stage impact startups. That's the short version.
Thank you. And a short version from you, Peter.
Thanks for having me. First of all, short about Danish Entrepreneurship Association. We are rather old. We're from '85, where everyone was like very capitalistic. And that has pretty much been the story of our organizations. What we've seen the past 3 to 4 years is that our members have changed a lot towards the impact agenda. And that has obviously given us motivation to change. But what we try is to foster successful companies, and we see now a big change in the companies that we serve, and also the definition of success.
Thank you. And so now I'm curious, I'd like to ask the both of you as well, what is your idea of an impact startup? And Peter, we'll start with you this time.
It's a tough question. You know, we had for many, many years, an impact startup was a successful company, hiring people, providing, making exports, taxes, and then we could hand over the money to our governments and they could do all the good stuff, right? So that's also sort of impact, right? But now that definition really doesn't work very well because you don't want only to be a successful company in terms of money. You want to make a different kind of success and be something good to the world. And here's the shift. We talked about every year we ask our members, what is the main reason that you started your company? And now it's 40% saying that they started their company to do something good. And that tells a lot about what's at stake here.
Definitely. And in your opinion?
Yeah, I can say that for us and for my personal view on it is that it has to be a startup that works with several bottom lines. So it means more than just the economical. It also has to have the social, the green as well. And it's about looking at the whole value chain. So if you create a positive impact on one sustainable development goal, it's important that you don't create a negative impact on one of the others as well. So I think it's very important that it's about the holistic point of view and also working with more than the sustainability agenda. And I actually would like to come with some examples to make it more clear.
Yeah,
maybe.
please do.
For example, there's a small company called Repot. They're working with the sustainable potteries for greeneries, but they also hire people with autism to pack their deliverances. Or Comeback Industries is a good example, a social enterprise that has been part of our hub that creates or helps young men with marginalized men to come into education, job, or creating their own impact startups as well.
Okay, interesting. So now, I mean, if you have to have several bottom lines, then I would be curious to ask, are sustainability and growth in an economical sense each other's opposites, or can they actually go hand in hand?
They should definitely go hand in hand.
Okay.
And that's, I think, is also part of the discussion that we are having because we're coming from two very different aspects, but it needs to be more balanced. It needs to go hand in hand. We need to make the right ecosystem and support structures as well for early stage startups so that we kind of go beyond just having a heart with a lot of positivity that wants to create something positive. We need to look at how to scale it as well and find the best solution and scale those solutions as well.
Okay, and so, but Peter, can impact startups sort of save the world?
Yes, I hope so. I would say, just connecting your previous questions, we do see, and you don't need to look very long to find analysis on how big the market for solving the SDGs is. It's $1 trillion market, right? So obviously, it's a business opportunity, and an enormous business opportunity. What we need to do now is to use the advantage we have, because we have a fantastic environment for impact startups. And I think there's a parallel to how our country looked in the 90s, where we had the internet. That I think the internet was a smaller business opportunity compared to the SDGs, but let's look at it, right? We had a lot of companies, a fantastic underground. We got startups out of it. And then we did make a few scale-ups that turned into these cliche unicorns, right? But they flagged out. They went to the States. Now we see the same thing. And my biggest fear right now is that we end up exactly the same way. So we have a great pipeline. We might create some big companies, but they will find investors in China or the US. Now it's even UK, right? It's outside our EU. And then we end up talking about who will be we have the tech giants now, right? And they're Chinese or American. Who will be the climate giants? And I fear that in 10 years we'll have this fantastic event one more time, and we'll be looking at that the Google and Facebook of the climate revolution will not be Danish, and that is a serious challenge we have to look at.
Okay, so sorry, you had a comment?
Yeah, but it was to the question if impact startups can save the world, yeah. And you said yes, and I might say no, not alone. I definitely have a hope that they can, but I think they're part of the solution. But if we want them to be part of that solution, then we also really need to give them access to the right partnerships, to the right markets. We need to help them with giving them the right business advisors around them, all the structure, the way that the Danish erhvervsfremme, what's that called in English, the business support structures around Denmark is right now needs to be much more focused and have the right competencies of lifting this space. Yeah. And
Yeah, I totally agree. We spend a lot of taxpayer money on a big public system to support small companies' growth and startup and so forth. And we need to make sure that these kind of initiatives, they support initiatives like this. Because what we see is that it's the champions of the ecosystem that really carries a lot of success on their shoulder. And we need to support those champions. And way too often we see the big public with their big money of taxpayer money, they sort of like bulldoze everything. So that's very important, and obviously startups cannot succeed alone. It's a big part of an ecosystem that is not mature in terms of money, talent, but also advisory.
So in your opinions, what could actually be done in the sense to create a support system that actually creates access for these startups with a lot of know-how, but they don't have the access to the proper ecosystems, or maybe the ecosystems are not accessible to the small startups?
In my opinion, one of the things is to actually create that ecosystem, both on local levels, but also national, so that we make sure that these competences are also accessible. If you are in Hirtshals or if you are on the west coast of Denmark, that it's way more easy for you to go into an ecosystem and being part of that network and meet someone who can either help you or guide you towards a place where you can get help. There is a lot of, for example, the Innovation Fund Denmark. They have a brilliant program where you can get a salary for a time period, and they also help you with your business at the same time. That's just one example, but that's not necessarily anything you know if you're not part of an incubator at a university or something like that as well. So it's fragmented. It's too fragmented, in my opinion, and there needs to be way more focus on that, also from the government side.
And what do you think? Do we need a completely new ecosystem?
I would elaborate on Anne-Katrine's point on the national reach, because impact startups have something to do basically with our nature, and the nature is not in the big cities. So if you're to fix the CO2 emission from farming or from cattling or whatever, or even from your supply chain, you need to be out there. You need to have in-depth knowledge. So we really have to reach out to entrepreneurs. We're not used to reaching out to, first and foremost, because they are very different from the entrepreneurs that we used to have, and secondly, because they are different places than we used to have them. And I think also that what we really need is to find the right balance between sort of like the heart that is very strong, so the will to make a change, but also the acceptance that in order to make a scalable business, you need to accept capitalism as, you know, the main force for scaling your business. And sometimes you need, as an entrepreneur, to compromise. And I think way too often we see entrepreneurs so strong in their belief that they either, you know, reject capitalism as, you know, the main driving force, or they're not willing to compromise on their business in order to reach the scale. And, you know, impact is not only about, you can make one fantastic beer, but the sum of impact is how many beers do people drink all over the world that looks like this. And way too often we see, yes, you have built a fantastic product, but your market share is, you know, without any impact. So this is the dynamics we have to go. There's also a responsibility on the entrepreneur.
So how do you see that, Anne-Katrine?
Yeah, I agree. I partly agree, but there's also a balance in it, like the compromising part. And I think that the fashion industry is a good example of that can be used. Because, you know, the whole value chain and the effect that you want to create as a business or an impact startup, and now, you know, we can all agree that that's the way that all big companies need to look at. But for instance, the fashion industry, if you look at recycled materials, and if you don't look at the production and logistics of it, then it's difficult to kind of believe that it's going actually somewhere fast enough. So I think it's a balance, but I agree on the part that it needs to be way more scalable and it needs to be way more business-minded. But still, there needs the support structures. Around it.
And totally, we see often big companies greenwashing by buying up startups, and then they just, you know, integrate them into the big system, and that is like a scary scenario that you can scale and then get picked by one of the big players, and you end up with a zero impact. So this is also a challenge, but at least you can decide whether you want to get whether you want to sell or not.
But so this might be a grosser generalization, but it sounds to me like so you've got very ideological startups who want to make an impact on several levels, and then you might have funds and investors who are mostly interested in growth in an economical sense. How do you sort of match the two?
I think they can be matches, and I also think that we are on the way, but not good enough yet. But I think that there is some main issues about it's hard to being an impact startup because there are so many levels you have to deliver on. You have to deliver on the effect of the impact that you create. You have to deliver on the return of the investments. You have to deliver on so many levels that's not the classical way of delivering via an investment. as well. And I think that both funds and investors also need to have a much better dialogue, because it's still so much in different aspects. There are a huge generation of new startups that are very much also impactful. They need to be aware of being it in the whole value chain. There is a lot of idealists who want to create impact, and they also want to do it in scale, but they actually don't know exactly how to. So what is the responsibility of the funds? What is the responsibility of the investors? I think that there is something there that also needs to be approached in this discussion.
What is your take on this, Peter?
I think it has improved from an investor point of view, and I think it's a parallel that entrepreneurs has been better in presenting their business case, so that both bottom lines are represented, also the financial bottom line. But it's still, and some of these impact solutions, they are very complex, and there's a high risk, and it takes a long time to prove it, and these cases have tremendous difficulty in raising funds, and that is something we need to look at. I think the public sector have done a lot now to establish, green funds. But I think the most proven success is when you bring private money into it, experiences. And it's pretty risky to invest in a startup, and especially in Denmark, because you're taxed really high on your investment. So an easy win could be to say, if you invest in impact startups, you can deduct favorably, or do like these mechanisms that we know will work instantly.
Yeah, but I think it's also about, helping on an early stage, both with investments. Maybe it's not that big amount of money, but like something that's more risk willing, and smaller amounts. There needs to be some kind of risk in those solutions that have a big potential, but need like the start capital, small start capital, but also some real support on how to grow and scale their business as well.
Yeah.
So I think there's something there, which also leads me to the APS, what's it called in English?
Limited liability.
Limited liability, yeah, exactly. Where it's very expensive in Denmark to create a company like that. It's 40,000 Danish kroner, which is way over the rest of the EU countries, and that's difficult. If you are 3 young founders who has a great idea, and it's not necessarily possible to get a loan in the bank, because some of these impact startups comes with very different background. There's a lot of diversity, and it's not. There was a politician, I remember, we had a debate in June down here as well, who said, well, everyone can go in the bank and get a loan. Everyone can just do that. If you want to create a business, then and in my opinion, that's also a huge barrier, because it's very the classical point of view and the way that you think a startup is. It's not the same anymore. So there is some structural part that needs to change there as well. Yeah, and that is just an example. We actually were doing this suggestion to change that together as well. So we don't completely disagree.
And so you've already talked about some of the structural barriers. So this is one thing that...
that is like a specific example of something.
Do you have other specific examples that you'd like to highlight?
I would just like, in general, we have like two-tongued politicians, because on the one hand, we even had the Prime Minister saying that we cannot, just recently, we cannot reach the 70% without innovation and startups, right? And then on the other hand, there's so many new administrative burdens on top of that you need to come with these 40,000. You need to now, because of the laundry directive, money laundering directive, you need to pay to get a bank, if you can even get a bank. A lot of companies cannot even get a bank connection, though it's by law you have to have a banking connection. And I imagine impact startups have even harder time doing that. We have, like, now we're discussing that we must have an auditor. That's something that the Parliament will look at in the fall. That will also make it difficult. So we're making it more and more difficult to say, okay, I want to take the risk, I want to start a company, and 40%, as I said, want to actually change the world. And then, we're a very corporate Denmark. Nobody really takes risks in this country. We're very low in the percentage of self-employed compared to employed. And when they finally say, okay, I want to do it, then you have all these burdens that you need to handle. And I think it's difficult because in order to make the new impact unicorns or whatever we call them, you need pipeline. You need places like this where, everything is popping up from the soil.
Yeah.
And the thing is actually also, just the last thing you mentioned, like everything is popping up from the soil, and there is like a huge interest from startup side also to help each other, trying to open the doors for each other, trying to be in communities where actually ideas can thrive and the business can grow, etc. So there is also something missing in Denmark around different areas in Denmark. There is a lot of things going on in Copenhagen, but there is a lot of accelerator programs for impact startups and etc. But still, again, it's how do you know that if you're not part of that ecosystem or network, or if you're not part of a co-working community or something where you meet others that can kind of tell you about it. So
it's
there is also something there.
Right?
It's super fragmented.
Yeah. What about the barriers? Because you, Peter, said that around 40% they want to do good, so that's a huge percentage. And Katrine, you're saying that there are so many parameters that the impact startups need to sort of reach. So are there any barriers in getting people to actually wanting to start an impact startup?
I think it's actually easier with impact startups because in general, you're crazy to start your own company in Denmark, right? So you need to have some kind of mission. You need to have a bigger purpose, right? So I think actually, and that's the good thing that you have no other choice. That's what I'm gonna do. It makes sense or not, I'm gonna do it anyway, right? Like we have this bumblebee that everyone says you cannot fly, but the bumblebee doesn't care, right? So I think impact startups are very much like bumblebees.
And there's a big courage, to start impact businesses in Denmark.
Yeah.
So there also needs to be some kind of courage from other sides of the ecosystem to make them thrive or fly.
Definitely.
To be in that.
Definitely. Build the flowers and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so we're about to sort of reach the end of this talk, but the last question I'd like to ask, you said, Peter, that the public society can do so much, but it's also when the private companies come into play that it becomes really interesting. So how do we promote the private companies to play a bigger part of the impact startups?
But courage again, the private companies also needs to be more risk willing in order for them to collaborate with impact startups and not wait until that they are bigger, because it's a startup thing. So they need to be more open to make partnerships with them as well, even though that there can be risk in it. So I think that's also part of the dots that needs to be connected within the ecosystem. Yeah, that's one thing. Mm.
It's really powerful to get the large corporates into this. There's also a lot of pitfalls because you have two very different cultures. I think also there's a change in that, and it's mutual, because the more mature the impact startups gets, the more they can have a dialogue with the big corporations. But what do the big corporations want to do? I love the example. So let's look at electrical cars. Tesla did not only create their own market; they forced all other automobile producers to invest heavily in electric. So I think also there's a role for startups to to experiment and show another way. And this is how you can create impact way beyond the startups themselves. But everyone will start reacting and pursue that direction, or even try to buy your startup.
Thank you so much. So I hope that we now gave some really good ideas to what can be done, that we in Denmark should be more risk-willing, that it's not, that it's this way that we actually can promote impact startups. We need a new sort of ecosystem where people can get access to what they actually need, so they don't only have the know-how of what to do, but they also get the support system. And then the final note, that people actually want to make an impact. So that's why we should definitely support them in this. And Katrine and Peter, I'd like to say thank you so much for your very good input, concrete suggestions, and good reflections. Again, ideas that have hopefully helped to show why it is so important with impact startups. Thank you to our audience here in the room and behind the screens. My name is Munisa Rosendahl. Thank you so much, and have a great day.